I'd like to talk about the day that I realized that I was participating in my own suffering. The first time that I heard this story that I'm going to tell you about, I didn't like it. David Burns, MD, feeling good, feeling great, was on his podcast and he was talking about, a client, his clinical practice, that it was a girl divorced, with her ex-partner every week, had a child handover. And every week, without fail, he would criticize her, talking about the daughter. She's behind in reading. You're not consistent enough on various things. You should be more organized. And, it wasn't shouting and it wasn't overt abuse. It was a steady, needling commentary. And every time it happened, she felt the same internal surge, heat in the chest, tightening in the jaw, and the impulse to defend, to explain, counterattack. But what was really crushing for her wasn't just the moment of criticism. And it's not, is it, when you think about it? It's the dread of that began the days earlier. It was in the shower, in the imagined arguments, the mental courtroom. It's the anticipatory tension that lived in her body before the exchange had even occurred. She wasn't just suffering during the event, she was suffering before and after it. And that was the part that struck me. Burns didn't approach this as a philosophical problem. He didn't attempt to analyze her childhood or re-engineer her ex's personality. Instead, he treated it as behavioral and a cognitive loop. He gave her a structured experiment. And this goes right back to the behavioral component of CBT, isn't it? Like every time your ex criticizes you, he said, you get a point. And when you reach 10 points, you buy yourself something small, but genuinely enjoyable. Get a haircut, go have a meal, a treat, something concrete. When the criticism comes, don't defend it automatically. Instead, use what Burns calls the 5 secrets of effective communication. Spoken about that in another video, but look for the grain of truth. So acknowledge it calmly, use inquiry. So if he says he's behind in reading, you might respond, you know what? You're right. I haven't been as consistent as I would like. So you see the truth in it, right? And you respond honestly. Or, hey, I can see this really matters to you. Are you worried that she's falling behind? There's no sarcasm. There's no collapse. No counterpunch, just grounded acknowledgement. And so he tells this story, which I may have butchered it, but the essence of it is the same. That within weeks, something shifted and the tone softened, the criticism decreased, the tension dissipated, and the dance changed. When I first heard this, that I was almost skeptical. It felt almost too simple. But then something uncomfortable happened. I recognized myself in the pattern. Not in the specific context, but in the structure. The script I didn't know I was performing. I began to see that in many areas of my own life was running the same loop. Someone would say something that pricked me. I would bristle. I would defend. I would escalate internally or externally. I would replay it in my head. Then, days later, I would anticipate the thing happening again. Different people, different context, same pattern. What began to dawn on me was that I was participating in the conditioning of those interactions. That's not a moral accusation. It's a behavioral observation. If you strip away the emotional drama and just look at it through the lens of learning theory, the kind of psychology that predates most modern therapy, you see something startlingly simple. I want to tell you about, takes me back to Psych 101, but there was Ivan Pavlov who rang a bell, and at the dog, it salivated. And over time, the bell itself became enough to produce the response. And one of the other behaviors, Jeff Skinner, showed that behaviors followed by reinforcement tend to repeat, even negative reinforcement. So removal of discomfort can actually strengthen a behavior. Translate that into adult life. Think about it like someone criticizes you, right? And you respond intensely. They receive stimulation, energy, impact, like we see it in bullies. If they just poke, right? And if you react, you receive the momentary relief from the tension. And both nervous systems learn something and the pattern strengthens. Then anticipation kicks in. Your brain begins predicting the next encounter. And that prediction triggers a psychological response days in advance. The dread is no longer about what is happening. It's about what your brain expects will happen. This isn't mysterious conditioning. When I saw my own life through that lens, I felt both exposed and empowered. For example, I exposed because what it meant was I wasn't simply a passive victim of other people's behavior. I felt empowered because there was leverage somewhere in between the system. Most of us operate with a deeply intuitive model of emotion. I said that made me feel this. And it feels all right. It's embedded in our language. You made me angry. That gave me anxiety. She hurt my feelings. This model quietly assumes something that modern cognitive science does not support. That emotional responses are direct reflexive outputs caused by external stimuli, with no meaningful interpretive step in between. Over the past 2 decades, a growing body of research in affective neuroscience has challenged this view. And one of the most influential voices in this space is Lisa Philbin Barrett, whose theory of constructed emotion proposes that emotions are not hardwired reactions, triggered like buttons in the brain. Rather, they are constructed in the moment by the brain's predictive processes. So the brain in this model is not a passive receiver of reality. It's an inference machine, and it constantly predicts what sensory inputs mean. Drawing on the past experience in cultural learning and internal bodily states, it constructs the most plausible interpretation in real time. It's incredible, right, when you think about it. So when someone says you dropped the ball, your brain does not receive attack as the physical entity. It receives sounds waves, right? Then rapidly generates prediction. This means I am being judged. This means that I have failed. This means I am unsafe. This means I must defend. From that prediction, the emotional experience is assembled. And the interpretation happens so quickly that it feels like a direct cause and effect. But there is a middle step, and that step isn't trivial. It's generative. To borrow a philosophical image, your brain is like a brain in a vat. You remember that story? It has no direct access to the external world. Like it doesn't. It receives signals, sight, sound, bodily sensations, and it must infer what they mean. Magnificent. You never experience reality unfiltered. Experience your brain's best predictive model of it. When this truly landed for me, like something shifted. The anger I felt in certain situations was not injected into me by another person. It was assembled inside of my nervous system through meaning making. That doesn't make it fake. It makes it structured, and structures can be examined. What became painfully clear was that the event itself was often the smallest part of the experience. There were 3 layers. Before the interaction, you've got rehearsal. This is going to be awful. I know how this goes. I'm ready for it. You've got during the interaction, interpretation. Here we go again. They'll think I'm incompetent. I need to defend. And we've got after the interaction, like rumination. Why didn't I push back? I always mess this up. The event was 1 sentence. The suffering was hours. And I was attributing the suffering almost entirely to the sentence. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, which Burns helped to popularize, has long argued that emotions are strongly influenced by automatic thoughts, rapid, often unnoticed interpretations that arise in response to events. Decades of empirical research have demonstrated that identifying and modifying these cognitive distortions can significantly reduce the symptoms of depression and anxiety. And I've spoken about David's upgraded version of this as CBT as Team CBT. But this wasn't just about reducing symptoms. It was about understanding the mechanism of dread. And when your brain predicts that an event will be threatening, then it prepares your body in advance. Fight, flight, or the preparation feels like fear, your prediction, and the learning strengthens. If you replay the event afterwards, you reinforce the pattern further. You are quite literally training yourself for dread. Once you see that, the question then becomes, what am I reinforcing? And you might push back at this point and say, well, what? So it's all in my head? Yes, no. External events are real, right? So criticism is real. Injustice is real. Some people generally difficult. Some situations are genuinely harmful. What is under discussion is not of the reality of events, but the process by which emotional suffering expands around them. If emotions were directly caused by external stimuli, you would be completely powerless. Anyone could control your inner state by simply speaking. But if emotions are constructed through predictive interpretation, then there is a hinge in the system, not full control, not omnipotence, but influence. And that hinge is the interpretive step. And influence is leverage. This distinction matters profoundly. It shifts the conversation from blame to design. Blame says, you shouldn't feel this way. Design says, how is this being built? Shift alone reframes suffering as a system rather than a fate. Look, there are psychological payoffs for the poke and cause model. If I believe someone else made me feel this, then I retain the moral clarity. I'm a villain, justification for my anger. I avoid examining the meaning that I've constructed, and I preserve the narrative that I am acted upon rather than participating. Letting go of that model costs something, right? It costs the simplicity of the blame. It costs the rush of righteous outrage, and it costs the comfort of certainty. In the broader cultural landscape, we see how reinforcing outrage can be, right? Political discourse thrives on it. News cycles amplify it. Social media rewards it. The emotional surge that follows a headline is not incidental. It's reinforcing. This does not mean that the underlying issues are trivial, right? It means that our internal reactions are shaped and strengthened through repetition and reward. Same mechanism operated in the weekly child handover for that lady, operate in scrolling a newsfeed. What happens inside you when the notification arrives? That is the conversation. What actually changed in Burns' clinical example? Two variables shifted. First, meaning the patient stopped interpreting criticism as an identity level attack and they began treating it as information, sometimes poorly delivered, sometimes value driven, sometimes irrelevant. Second, reinforcement. So by responding calmly and refusing to escalate, she stopped rewarding the behavior with the emotional energy. By giving herself the points and rewards, she began reinforcing composure instead of combat. This is not mystical transformation. This is behavioral extinction and reconditioning. When a behavior is no longer reinforced, it tends to weaken over time. When a new response is reinforced, it strengthens. And the dance changed because the choreography was no longer rewarded. When I began experimenting with this in my own life, it felt unnatural. Responding with acknowledgement instead of defense felt like surrender. My nervous system interpreted it as like weakness. But that's when I realized that I was violating an internal rule. Always defend, never concede, never look wrong. These rules felt absolute, but I never consciously agreed to them. They were inherited scripts, decisions I'd made long ago, and they were costing me peace. When I stopped performing half the dance, then some of the conflict softened. Some didn't, but something else changed. The dread decreased, and that alone was transformative. The larger implication, this is not a call to passivity, right? This is a call to awareness. If your brain constructs emotional experience through prediction and interpretation, then you have the capacity to examine those constructions. I think it's great news. If a behavior is shaped by reinforcement, then you can ask, well, what are you rewarding? If dread is trained through rehearsal, then you can choose not to rehearse. None of this grants control over the world, right? It grants influence over your participation in it. And that's not trivial. And I truly understood that I'd been contributing to the amplification of my own suffering, not maliciously, not consciously, but mechanically, felt something close to humility and something like freedom. Because mechanical systems can be adjusted. Once you see the gears, you stop blaming the ticking. You begin to redesign the movement. And that's not fluffy. It's structural, behavioral. It is, in the deepest sense, practical. And it begins with a question most of us have never asked. What exactly am I reinforcing?